will control the vertical.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthology with your host Mark. Today we've got a bit of a treat. I've got a guest on. I don't usually guest. I solo these, as you guys will probably know quite well. And I often use the royal we when I'm talking, but it's just me. But today I have got a guest, and this is Mike. Hi, Mike.
Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not bad. Now, Mike is on some of my favourite podcasts. He's a co-host on some of my favourite Chin Stroker versus Punter and the Rewatch project with his lovely wife Hannah, and Paul is his co-host on Chin Stroker versus Punter. And I've had Mike on other shows. We did a great episode on Salem's Lot, didn't we, Mike? For example.
Yes, where we talked specifically about the Toby Hooper, David Soul TV movie from the late 70s, but I believe you did the full enchilada.
I did the full enchilada, sequels, books.
The Rob Lowe version.
Yeah.
I thought of you the other day, actually, Mark, because the Dude and a Monkey, Ian Loring and our friend Mark and Becky's podcast, they recently, they just cover off kind of new releases. So a couple of months back, they covered off the quote new, although it was sat on a shelf for a couple of years, Salem's Lot. Yeah. And Becky, one of the co-hosts, said, "Oh, don't bother with this. Watch the Rob Lowe version. It's amazing. Don't bother with this and the rubbish David Soul version." And I actually had to say that is the worst thing I have ever heard on a podcast. And she kind of admitted that she hadn't seen the David Soul version since she was really little, and even then wasn't sure she watched all of it. So I think it was just one of the off.
That's just wrong.
But it enraged me when I heard that.
She's right though. The new one is awful. Yeah, I have seen it. The Rob Lowe one is way better than it, but that's that. You know what the Rob Lowe one's like.
Yeah,
so,
well, you're comparing diarrhea to vomit, really. At
yeah, it's a bit like that. Right. So today, the reason I asked Mike on is I came across this really bizarre anthology series mentioned about a year or two ago, and I remember picking you at the time, Mike, and saying, "Would you fancy coming on for this?" Because there's a certain actor in it that I know that you really like, and I like him too. But
I would say a couple of actors that I really
actually
like in this.
That's good. But this is a bizarre one. It is called Metal Hurlant Chronicles. That's the English form, but I guess in fact it's French. So it's actually Metal Hurlant Chronicles, I guess. I'm going to butcher it there. And this is, get this, a Franco-Belgian science fiction anthology show done in English language, based on the magazine, Metal Hurlant, which is heavy metal. And in looking into this, it blew my mind because I always assumed Heavy Metal, the magazine, was a US product because it seemed so US. But actually, it originated in France. The French version, Metal Hurlant, came first, and the original runs of Heavy Metal were just English translations of the French stories. Then it spun off into its own thing. However, France came first on this. It's quite interesting, right?
It is, and I thought the same, because I think that it's been heavy metal, the the aesthetic and the shorthand that it's become. You'll see people say, "Oh, this has a heavy metal influence," and they're not talking about the music genre; they're talking about this.
Yes,
and it's become so synonymous. You'll see people, in everything from documentaries about the making of Alien and Blade Runner and the great 70s and 80s science fiction will talk about, we were trying to evoke heavy metal, that I think it's become so heavily appropriated by American popular culture that that's a reasonable confusion to have.
Yeah. And indeed, I remember going to see the heavy metal movie, I think from 1980 at the cinema. I remember seeing it.
I remember renting, this will age me, renting the vinyl album of heavy metal from my local library. But this was pre-video rental. And the closest you could get to films, aside from watching them on TV, or any sense of ownership or rental, was to rent the vinyl from the local library and listen to it while sort of fetishizing and stroking the cover of the album.
Or the novelization, right? Novelization.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all of this sort of ephemera that is, I think, so coveted by us Gen Xers. Is probably somewhat baffling to those who.
Yeah, we're going to have to do a whole podcast on member berries, I think, because there's so many elements to that to unpack. If I start, we'll just be talking about that instead of this episode. So let's get on with this episode. This, as I say, a Franco-Belgian anthology series. Went to 2 seasons, only 6 episodes in each, but 12 episodes in all. And I have to say, straight off the bat, I like this one so much, I just ordered them. Because you could get them on Blu-ray, so I just ordered them.
Wow, so these exist in HD?
They do, yes. And I watched it a second time on the HD version. It looked great. And I've got a 75-inch TV.
Wow.
So, yes, it looked really good. This actually first aired on French TV on Channel 4 in France. First aired this particular episode, 27th of October 2012. And the 2 seasons, the first aired during October and only 6 days. So they must have shown one a night, 27th of October to the 3rd of November 2012. And then season 2 aired from the 4th of January 2014 to the 12th of May 2014. Obviously stretched out because there was only 6 episodes, but January to May, there's a lot of weeks between them. So it was probably one of those things where it was just throwing them here and there, filling time slots, I'd imagine. And it actually also made its way to Sci-Fi Channel in the UK eventually. But I didn't catch it there. Wasn't even aware of this. I can't even remember how I came across this. I just read a lot of stuff about anthology TV, and then sometimes an odd show gets mentioned, and I think this is one of those. Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did. I mean, it's for me. There's several defining elements to this, which are enjoyable and problematic. And I'm going to use a word that I use a lot, which sounds condescending on the surface, but I don't mean it, is charm. I think this has a lot of charm.
Yeah.
And I think that the one thing I don't think you've mentioned is the runtime, which I think is quite an important thing to note. Is it's only 23 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible, arguably, piece of folly to try and explore and tell a story in an entire universe in 23 minutes.
Yes.
So I think that's the one defining element of this for me. The other defining element is the cast, is the fact that we've got Scott Adkins and Michael Jai White, who were, coming up at this time and were the kind of heir apparent to the Steven Seagals and the Brian Bosworths and the Jean-Claude Van Dammes. They were the sort of the vanguard of this new wave of direct-to-video action stars who grew up on those films from the late 80s. And Jai White and Adkins had worked together many times. They're friends and they're collaborators. And, the Boyka films that really made Adkins, the first one starred Michael Jai White. Adkins was the villain in that. So it's interesting. So there's that. It's fun watching actors that I enjoy working together and chewing the scenery in the way that you only really can in bonkers pseudo-medieval science fiction. And I think the other defining element of this as well are the aesthetics. this is just to pull the curtain back. Mark and I were texting a little bit, and I said that this was the most 2012 thing I've ever seen, and how I didn't even think that 2012 had an aesthetic. It was too recent to actually think of and have the distance enough to think of in those terms, in those sort of what are the things that stylistically define this era. But I've realised it did. And a big part, of course, of this aesthetic, which is probably the thing that actually made it financially viable, is that heavily green screened post 300, post Spartacus, Sky Captain. There was a scene at the time that was really popular for a really short period of time called machinima. Are you familiar with that term?
No. Is it like 300, inspired by 300 and Sin City kind of stuff?
It's sort of, but machinima is filmmaking that's made where people would take cutscenes from video games and weave them into and repurpose them into narratives. Okay. And there was a website called Machinima, and Machinima actually became successful enough that it produced its own things, and it actually made a Battlestar Galactica movie. It was a sequel to the 2000 series called Blood and Chrome, and it was a Machinima production. And what they did was, when they were tearing down the sets of the Battlestar Galactica series, they sent one of their people in to scan all the sets, and they basically made a green screen film where it was just actors performing in front of green screens. And what that does is, one of the things that's specific about the era, and I think very much specifically about the Machinima films, the Battlestar Galactica one, Spartacus, Blood and Sand, 300, all of those sort of things, Sky Captain as well, is that what a technique that they used at the time, which is really apparent here, because this was being done on a TV budget, of course, was they would film the actors, they'd put the backgrounds in, but they'd put this kind of almost gauzy, Vaseline blur over it so the edges wouldn't show, so to speak. And that really just defines the aesthetic. So when I see something that has that grayish, monochromatic blur, that's so 2012. So I think that before even, I guess, thinking about the performances and the story and the execution, that whole kind of stew of cast, rather insane ambition, and the bonkersness that always comes with European co-productions. Has there ever been a European co-production that wasn't insane? There's something about that brings it out. Make this a very interesting thing. And I had never heard of this as well, and I don't quite know how that is possible. I think you can be critical of this really easily and say it's hammy. Whenever you see people in those medieval outfits in a pseudo sci-fi environment, it's impossible not to think of the 60s Star Trek. Which would use those sort of environments.
Did it feel like Star Trek? Yes.
And the earnestness of it that comes with, Michael Jai White's character is speaking in these kind of lofty Shakespearean tones as well. And it takes itself so seriously. It's rather wonderful. But I think it's fun. I think it has an interesting enough sting in the tail that one would expect from an episode of an anthology show. And I think that all of its shortcomings can be hand-waved as being kind of fun elements of the genre, and kind of add to the madness. And like I say, the ambition of trying to set all of this up and tell a story in 23 minutes. So, obviously the flaws in this thing are obvious, but I think that they actually kind of come out the other side a little bit and end up being quite charming. And the performances and the action, because of course it is performed by these very capable martial artists and performers. Largely enjoyed it.
It's massive strength where you could see they were really doing it, and it was really effective fighting. And they could slow down the video, and it looked completely authentic because they were actually doing it. It was this kind of a really interesting series to me. Let me just wet your whistle on this, Mike. Season 2, episode 1 stars Michael Biehn, from the Terminator, and James Masters, Spike from Buffy. Those two are in episode 1 of season 2.
It's funny. I did have a little scan, and I noticed that there was a lot of sci-fi luminaries, and that's the other very 2012 thing of it. Is that a lot of shows, and like the rebooted Doctor Who is an example, the Russell Davies Moffat years, but also the Stargate TV shows, particularly Stargate Atlantis. there was a period in the 2010s of stunt casting of genre actors. Like you saw loads of people from Star Trek and Farscape turning up in Stargate.
Yeah.
And the only logic, Smallville did this as well. The only logic really behind their casting was, hey, do you remember this guy in Farscape? Do you remember this guy in Voyager? And there was this very short period of intense casting cross-pollination occurring across a lot of these genre shows. So when I looked at the cast list of this, I was like, oh, yeah, that was a thing then, wasn't it?
Yeah. Rutger Hauer turns up in it, and, there's all sorts. It also made me think the same thing happens a bit in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right, as well, which you covered on Rewatch Project, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was, that started around that time as well. That was like that was around 2012, actually.
Yeah.
But that started. So, I think that happens less now, because I think that this was a really interesting point in the arc of geek culture, but also I think that it speaks to the European co-production of it as well, is the fact that, a lot of these European co-productions, there is an element of a, dog and pony show, there is an element of them rustling up the money. And there's hey, we've got Michael Biehn, I think there is a showmanship element there as well.
Yeah. I just really enjoyed this. I realised there was lots of exposition dressed up as like cod Shakespearean, like people shouting. Some of the naming did make me laugh. There was one guy who said, I've forgotten his name, but it's so and so of Cheshire. He said at one point.
Yeah,
so
well, that was the thing I was
trying.
It's a little bit like the whole Cheshire thing. It's a little bit like Lord of the Rings when I first saw that. I like I say, I'm not going to lie and say red, but when I first saw that, I was like, well, is Middle Earth a continent on another planet? How does that work? And my mind was doing similar acrobatics here, trying to figure out, like, so is this Earth? Is it, and I think ultimately it doesn't matter.
No, who cares, right? One of the things they talked about was that asteroid thing that was flying around being part of the planet Metal Hurlant that had been destroyed. Yeah. And apparently it's a through line. Every episode contains that asteroid in the sky at some point.
That's the cat that wanders into each story, kind of.
Yes. I have to say, there was one thing that I don't know. I don't know if it's me. I've seen a few Scott Adkins films. I'm a big fan of Accident Man and Accident Man 2, and I'm kind of familiar with his accent. But to me, he sounded like he was trying to do Ringo Starr here. It sounded like a nasal, deep Liverpudlian accent, which seemed odd to me. Did that strike you out, or am I
Yeah. There was. Atkins does make some weird choices when it comes to accents in general. His natural accent is very much just straight down the middle English actor accent.
Yeah.
But here, again, I think this might be the European co-production of it. I think that they felt that. I think the accent he was directed to give was their equivalent of Old English.
Right.
I think, but in the minds of the filmmakers, that's what Old English sounds like. But I think that was it. But yeah, that struck me as well. I was kind of like, oh, that's a choice.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's like Game of Thrones had started around now and was getting really popular. So I was wondering, and that's tends to take the sort of northeast accent, doesn't it? There's a lot of that in it, and other accents. But I was wondering if that might have influenced what was going on.
For a lot of people, the Beatles accents, that's it. That's what an English accent is. That's often when you hear somebody doing a parody on The Simpsons or something of an English person, that's the voice that they use.
Yeah. It's. I just really enjoyed this episode. I immediately bought both seasons. There's an element of me. I feel like I'm a curator of anthology TV. So when I find something I like, I tend to try and buy the physical media. And keep it. I want to rewatch all these or watch some of them for the first time because I haven't watched all of them already. And in this case, it was like, oh yeah, this is definitely something I want.
It's nice to have that sort of library as well, isn't it? And I think that the runtime. It almost feels like the runtime is a concession to the form. 23 minutes works very well, or 25 minutes, or 30 minutes with ads. Works very well for anthologies because I've always, again, it's a term I use a lot, but I've always thought anthology shows are a great one before bed kind of genre.
Yeah,
You
they
know, like I
definitely are.
remember when satellite TV or it was cable first came to the UK, and I remember I had Sky. They always used to have an anthology show on at about 11:30 at night. They'd oscillate between, you know, Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I loved watching one of those before going to bed. And you know, it's the runtime really suits that.
Yes. Oh, indeed. Another thing that struck me about this one is if you kind of animated this particular episode, right, you could put it into the 1980 heavy metal movie and it would totally fit. It would totally fit. That aesthetic has not changed. That's how it feels to me.
And I wonder if that's why this was chosen to be the first one, because it was very emblematic of that.
Possibly. I'd have to watch more to see. And it's interesting because some of the stars do appear in more than one. Scott Adkins is in a second one. Michael J. White is in a second one. Different episodes. James Masters is in a couple, and so on and so forth. And they've even got, I think, I can never get his name right. The guy that played Gimli, he's in one of them.
John Rhys Davies.
Yes, he's in one of them. So they've got some of that kudos. To me, you did, like you said, when we were texting about it, you said this is so 2012. And to me, the aesthetic feels very late 2000s, sort of Battlestar Galactica kind of aesthetic, but more cheerful, a little more cheerful. And you know, very melodramatic, but it's fun. And they've only got 22 minutes to deliver a story. So, and they go on with it. And I quite liked it. The twist was nice. We won't spoil the twist in case anyone wants to dig this out. This is available on YouTube. There is burnt in subtitles of a different language. I can't remember which one in the one on YouTube, but you can see this on YouTube. So it's possible to go away and watch this whenever suits you. I'm glad we covered this, and I'm glad you came on. As we said, I said you were a fan of someone. Scott Adkins, I was specifically referring to when I thought of you. When I saw this and I thought of you, it was about Scott Adkins, really.
And yeah, I mean, if anyone was going to like this, it was going to be me. I mean, one last thing I'll say about it is that I think one of the reasons why this works for me is it's the reason why people like Michael J. White and Scott Adkins work for me as well, is the fact that they don't parody. You know, they don't parody those movies from the 80s because they love them. They just do them. And there was an earnestness to those films. But I mean, the earnestness, you know, there was a tongue behind the cheek on those, but it was very well hidden. You know, it was more just the love and the relish and the enjoyment of getting to do it, you know. And I think that you feel that here when you get those earnestness and the pontificating and the speechifying and the prosaic way of talking. It is done completely sincerely, but ultimately can't help but be slightly ridiculous. But they know that. They're not showing those cards, but they know that. And I think that makes it very enjoyable. And I think that it suits the style. Yeah,
and they're unembarrassed by it. I was trying to think what 80s film this most made me think of. I mean, in terms of the elements, Krull, you know, the mix of sort of sword and sorcery with sci-fi. But actually, it felt more like, to me, something like Sword and the Sorcerer. That, you know, the exploitation end of the Conan kind of knockoffs. It felt very much like that. Yeah, very enjoyable. Let's wind up there because we don't usually run these for too long. Mike, please take this opportunity to tell our listeners a bit about the podcast you're involved with, please.
Yes. First and foremost, Chinstroker versus Punter, a film podcast I do with my friend Paul back in the UK. We've been doing that for nearly 17 years, which is insane. So I think we're tied with, outside the cinema, Film Spotting and Film Junk, I think we all started around the same time. Right. And I think we are amongst the longest running film podcasts. We don't record as often as we used to because of just the time differences between here and the UK, but we usually put an episode out every 2 or 3 weeks. And also I do the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike, which I do with my lovely wife Hannah, where we go back and we rewatch some of our favourite film and television franchises. And there's also a YouTube channel associated with that, which has a bunch of other film, television, music related pop culture goodness. So, yep, that's us.
Yeah, and you've just wound up Twin Peaks, the full rewatch of Twin Peaks too. Awesome.
We have, yeah. We did all 3 seasons and the movie, the missing pieces, the whole business. And we're just doing a couple of sorbet episodes at the moment. We've just covered Meatballs, which is a nostalgic summer favourite of Hannah's, and where the next one we're recording is Ice, the X-Files episode from season 1.
Amazing episode.
Yep. And also, I was going to do The Thing, but then I thought, well, Ice is basically the same thing, and it's only 45 minutes long. So, we'll go for that. And I missed the X-Files as well. Hannah and I did a rewatch of that, not for the podcast. That was just a recreational rewatch. And then we're going to be covering Babylon. Have you ever seen Babylon 5?
No, I am intending to watch as you go along.
I'm really happy to see that, because what
so I'll be dropping in stuff if I like. If I don't like it, I'm just going to go quiet. Right.
Yeah, no. If you don't like it, I'd like to hear, because I would understand that, because I mean, one of the big jokes I make about 90s sci-fi is stick with it, it gets good in season 3. You know, that's the conventional wisdom. And Babylon 5 is the daddy of stick with it, it gets good in season 3. Season 1 and 2 are retroactively good when you've actually watched the whole thing and you go back and do a rewatch, because of the amount of seeding. Because, you know, the thing with Babylon 5 is it's written by one guy, which, when you consider it's got these 24 episode seasons and was a network TV show in the 90s, is insane.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm kind of juiced. I have to say, I'm juiced to watch it.
But it's very low budget in that first couple of seasons. So some of the acting is amazing, but some of it is what I call sci-fi acting, real scenery chewing. But to be honest with you, I think that your years of Doctor Who training will make you, and I think that the other way around has worked as well. I found that being a Babylon 5 fan has kind of helped me with Doctor Who a little bit as well. So I think I've got enough. I feel like I'm shaming you in advance here, but I've got enough respect for you, Mark, to think that you'll be able to see past the ricketiness at actual guts of what's happening. So when the show itself actually gets to the point where the production value matches the ambition, somewhere around sort of season 2 and 3, I think. But I'm really glad that you're watching it, because I think it would be really interesting to have the voice of somebody who's watching it for the first time chiming in from time to time.
Yeah, we'll do. Anyway, let's wind up this episode. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure and a real change up. You know, usually it's just me droning on for 10 and 15 minutes about something. So it just makes a change. It's a bit of a treat as well for the new year. So anyway, goodbye from me.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Mark. It's been a joy as always.
Yeah, and until next time on Anthologic, but I'll leave you with this final thought. Is anybody out there?
I'm not.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to